at ya. At ya. Tell you what's master. Coming at ya. Coming at ya. Rhyme style disaster. Coming at ya. At ya. Tell you what's master.
Welcome to another scintillating, exciting, unbelievable episode of Cut the Bull. I am one of your regular hosts, Wilfred Reilly. I'm here today. My usual talented and lovely co-host, Christy Kelly, is not here, but my also talented and lovely co-host, Brooks Crenshaw, is with us. And today we're talking to Mary Grabar, the author, perhaps America's leading debunker, even ahead of me in that category, the author of the debunking series of books, quite a few of which have been bestsellers. So Mary, welcome to the podcast.
Well, thank you. Great to be here.
Yeah, great to have you on. I feel honored by a lot of the guests that we get, many of whom are people that I would read in my own life. I'll note, because I might seem a bit flustered, that I just flew back from New York City, had a great time talking to Jason Reilly's Manhattan Institute up there. But I guess to start off, Mary, you're an intellectual. How did you become one? What led you to that place from childhood on?
Well, being called an intellectual can be good or bad, but I've always been curious, and it goes back to my not being able to go to kindergarten, if you really want to go way back. But anyway, I am an immigrant officially from a communist country, the former Yugoslavia, Slovenia to be precise, and came here when I was 2 years old. And so I was talking about this with a friend, and I really desperately wanted to go to school and learn how to read. And my father could not read books to me. And my sister, he tried to sound out the words. We had one storybook between the two of us, and it's like, I want to crack that code. What is this book really saying? It was about, the boy Hiawatha and his little bear in a teepee. So, strange story for Slovenian immigrants. So ever since then, I've just, been intrigued by the ideas that are in books. Always had a library card, and have always been a reader and my whole life, and it's gotten me through some tough times, and I just want to know. I want to know how other people think, how other people live, and being a foreigner, I really didn't know what it was like to be an American, and I learned about being an American by reading books about these horses and the island off of North Carolina and Chautauqua. I can't even pronounce it, Dr. Dolittle, but it was just, a way to learn about the life around me. It was on the outside, not in my home.
That's fascinating. And it's interesting because I think we used to have more of a shared culture. I mean, I've read many of those same books as a working class Black and Irish kid in Chicago. I mean, the Young Indian Braves, Dr. Dolittle. He could talk to the animals, Barry. He could talk to the animals. But I mean, I think there really was that shared baseline. And this actually leads into my next question, which I didn't expect to ask. Our next one to Brooks. But when you say reading was a way to learn about the world outside, but also how to become an American as a young Slovenian girl, what did you conclude? Like, what does it mean to be an American to you?
Well, I've always been fascinated with the West. My father, loved Gunsmoke and Bonanza. And so this idea of freedom and just sort of striking out for the unknown under the open skies was just something that was very intriguing, charting your own course, being the master of your destiny rather than being confined to a certain job, a certain role in society. So that is what was really different, I think, about the American versus the Eastern European view. I always saw friends around me. They were usually from say Ukraine or Poland, but they were stuck. Their parents seemed to be stuck. And I always like that idea of striking out on your own, making your own way. And that's always appealed to me.
Great. So that actually is a very coherent idea of America even today. It's the place where you can strike out, do what you want, and be you. Strike out in both senses of the word, really. And last thing before my kind of passing the ball, next question, but I recall a buddy of mine, Navneet Iyengar, who's an East Indian guy. We were working on a trading floor together, basically. It's called Marcus Evans. It's in Chicago. And we were just BSing back and forth. Neither of us had, made any money that day. And he said, well, in my home country, I'm a Kshatriya. Like that's one of the giant caste I'm in, and my jati is this. And there are about two aggressive roles I could have gone into in life. I could have been a corporate litigator or a military officer. And the conversation went in a bunch of weird directions. Like he told me at one point, one of his ancestors was the high priest of Mysore on the Brahmin side of his family. So people in the rest of the world know a little more history than we do. But that's very much the opposite of the American way, right? But it is most of the world. Your father is a blacksmith. Your last name is Smith, and you will either be a blacksmith or a failure. And here, perhaps we offer a few more options. Brooks Crenshaw, what do you think?
Yes, sir. Well, I want to get to the book and I want to get to Zinn, but I want to stay on this topic because you open a door and I want to walk through it as well. I love speaking to people from, the former communist bloc. I've got plenty of friends from Cuba and Venezuela, and, their antenna when things have happened in America in the last 10 years are much more attuned to what's going on than the average American. Just does not have the radar for these things. But, in talking about how to become an American, what would you, with your background as a professor and as a well-read person and with your immigrant experience, what would you advise them with regard to how to become a good American, whether it's what to read, what to incorporate into your model in terms of assimilation? What would you tell them?
Well, I would say keep an open mind. Be curious all the time. And, having taught college for 20 years, I was struck by how close-minded a lot of my students and colleagues were. They were in this rut, they were going down this political lane, and they didn't dare look outside and question anything. And so they are constrained by ideology. And my students, I think, were afraid to even think outside of the box, much less say anything. And I stopped teaching in 2013 because I was basically canceled. But my students, as time went on, I found them, especially the boys, were more and more reluctant to speak up in class. They were afraid of offending others. And I think that is completely un-American. It's anti-American because, this is the land of innovation, of new ideas, of adventures, of exploration. And so that is so antithetical to Americanism, in my opinion.
That's great. Anything that you would advise? So if there's a new immigrant off the boat here listening, what would you have them read? Can you give me a quick reading list?
Oh my goodness. Well, as much history as you can, literature, because literature opens up entire new vistas that you just can't get from factual books. Biographies, but I find biographies to be very inspirational, to see how other people have done it. As a matter of fact, that's how I like to approach history, is to read about someone's life. And I think that goes back to my love of reading fiction, which I spent my waking hours doing when I wasn't in school or doing chores as a kid. So just follow your curiosity, go from one thing to the next, and don't be intimidated by what others think of you or what they say about you. And we need more people to be like that.
Definitely agree. Now, there's a good segue here because we're talking a lot about the school system, early life, what your experiences were like. you obviously are an author that's been very successful in that field in recent years. And a lot of what you've focused on, I know because I've used some of these books as sources for my own, like Lies My Liberal Teacher Told Me, which you should buy at Amazon or other fine booksellers. But one of the things
Mhm.
you focused on is the incorrectness of a lot of the narrative that modern, maybe middle to lower upper class Americans would hear that you hear in all the schools. So you wrote Debunking Howard Zinn, for example, and quite a few other books along those lines. I guess the first sort of broad question would be, what got you into? Well, actually, let's just what did Howard Zinn get wrong? What's the basis for this debunking that you've been doing for a decade or so?
Well, Howard Zinn, first of all, was a communist. He was actually a
That's what
member
he
of the
got wrong.
yeah, and so that uh, tinted his whole outlook, and basically his book, A People's History of the United States, is communist propaganda. It's what the Communist Party bosses were writing. You know, William Z. Foster. So I compared Zinn's book to one his a political history of America, and it was very similar. They had the same kind of conspiracy theories, the same suspicions, the same um, uh, you know. Motivations. The motivations were money, capitalism, greed, and that's what led everyone from Columbus on to subjugate other people for their own benefit. So it's the system, capitalism, that is to blame for all the suffering in the world, and that's just purely propaganda.
Fair enough. So there's kind of a core negative thread that's running through a lot of the works that you're critiquing, which is sort of this Marxist analysis of the USA or the West, in your opinion.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you go, into my second book on the 1619 Project, that also is a Marxist interpretation of the founding of this country and what this country is, a slavocracy, where only certain people are oppressed, and that is for the benefit of the rich white plantation owners and the business owners who, enjoy the fruits of the labor of those they oppress, and there has been no opportunity except for this one class of people, and on and on. I mean, it's a different version of the same Marxist narrative.
Yeah, now I think Brooks is going to have some pretty deep and insightful questions about why so many of our leaders, at least intellectually, seem to be actual red communists. But as a follow-up question about the 1619 Project, I looked through the initial New York Times Magazine series of essays, and as a social scientist, a lot of the things that were said seem to be openly crazy. I mean, for example, one argument was that the Revolutionary War was fought to end the practice of slavery because Britain was a very anti-slavery power at this time. Everything unique about the USA comes from Black people is an actual claim from Hannah Jones in the essay and in the project. Just on and on down the line. I mean, the USA was made wealthy by slavery. There's an estimate of 50% of basal wealth in, I think, 1814, which seems to come from counting cotton 8 or 9 times. So the actual raw cotton, then the cotton made into dresses, then the dresses being dyed. So my first question to you, as someone more familiar with the project, is how they get away with that? How is that published? And am I wrong about that? Am I wrong about that reading?
No, you're correct about that reading, and the reason they got away with it is because, well, who preceded her? Howard Zinn. So he sort of, set the pace in 1980. And his book is still selling. I don't know how many. It's several million copies by this point, but it's the same basic narrative. It's got variations. Howard Zinn goes into the oppression of various groups of people, of Blacks, Indians, women, on and on. Nicole Hannah Jones focuses on slaves. She pretends that every Black person is a descendant of slaves. Uh, and so it's the same kind of narrative. And so people are prepared for this. So by the time, 2019 rolls around, people have been exposed to Howard Zinn for almost 40 years. So, and it seems that they have been programmed to believe that anything positive about American history is false. I was in the English department, so everything's deconstructed, everything's attacked. You have critical theory. And so there is, this atmosphere of attacking the institutions of Western civilization. And so the 2019, in 2019, the 1619 project comes out. It seems just a little more edgy. And of course, New York Times subscribers are like quick to, buy it and then to buy the hardcover book. It's a status symbol. You put it on your bookshelf, you're woke. It's proof of your wokeness. It's a status symbol. So she tapped right into that. And you don't dare question the 1619 project. That's the thing I found is people, it's this fear. They don't want to question it because they'll be called racist or, whatever, or traitor to their race. So, she's gotten a hold on people, and it's amazing when you think about the genesis of it. Who was the writer that influenced her was Lerone Bennett, not a historian. He coined the phrase Black Power. and he wrote these propagandistic books, and she acts like she's, discovered this great scholar, uncovered all this history that no one else knew about.
All the historians were in error before Black people showed up to enlighten even them. Yeah, I
Yes.
mean, it definitely is pretty interesting. And this was during a period of extreme kind of condescension from the mainstream left toward minorities and sometimes women that was billed as final acceptance. I mean, I remember Ibram Kendi saying in the Washington Post that he knew standardized tests were irrelevant because he'd taken the SAT and only gotten a 10/20. And everyone just sort of went along with this, like, no, of course they don't work. You're the greatest genius of our age. And I mean, this combined with the trans moment, the George Floyd moment, was really one of those things that I think will be looked back on like we do the Dutch tulip bulb mania. But Brooks, what do you think? Communists are heavily influencing education. Actual communists, man. What's your take?
Well, yeah. So I want to preface the question with an assumption, and Mary, I want to get your take to ensure that you agree with this assumption. But the reason they can be so outlandish is that, because you touched on critical theory, so I want to go there. The neo-Marxists have a particular set of ingredients that they borrowed from the postmodernists with regard to no objective reality, and so that means no objective history, and that was kind of Zinn's underlying mantra. And therefore, if there's no objective history, it's just what the narrative does for your cause is the tool that's used, and that's to I would say accumulate power, and roughly speaking. And I think that's the through line between Zinn and 1619 et al. that we've been discussing. But you mentioned that, in academia in particular, and this is a conversation that Will and I often have, but you said that people are so hesitant to speak out and they don't want to rock the boat. And these are, you don't get much safer in life than a tenured professor. And, it seems counterintuitive that someone so safe would be so risk averse, but that seems to be the way that goes. To what do you attribute the often lean toward this neo-Marxist bent in that sphere? Why do they go that way?
Well, it's been a long time in coming. So if you go back to the 1930s, the intellectuals have always grasped at this notion of ruling from the commanding heights, to paraphrase Lenin. They like being in charge, and that's what Marxism is. I mean, there's the pretense that it's helping the workers, and the proletariat are going to rule themselves from everything, beginning with, work in the factories, and this is going to be a real true democracy. But the opposite is the case. And I think it's actually elitism. They don't, academics, especially those who are not real intellectuals. And I think we saw an influx in the 1960s where you had, people uh, dodging the draft by going to school. They had no business being there. They were not suited to the intellectual life. They had no curiosity. They just saw it as a union ticket. And so they like to think of themselves as being smarter than everyone else and being in charge. And, that is, the way communism actually works. They don't like the common people, they don't like common sense. And, they're at their perch, they want to be safe. So they don't rock the boat. They go along with what, first in graduate school, they go along with what the professor says, what their fellow students say, write their theses and dissertations to order so they will be accepted, and just sort of coast through life. And they want it easy, and they want to be in charge.
Yeah, that's a really good summary there. I mean, Tom Sowell, obviously, who we've all read,
Yeah.
calls this the anointed versus the benighted model of decision making, if I recall that correctly. Like, so if you poll humans, especially males, you get two ideas about where knowledge comes from. One is that almost all of it comes from those people who have been properly trained to be expert, capital E, and people who are smart and a bit amoral tend to be very drawn to this, I've found. Like at any point, we can take these schlubby little humans, remake society in whatever image we want. And Sowell says, well, in economics, actually, what we find is that the quote unquote benighted model of knowledge generation works a lot better. Knowledge about how to treat your husband or your wife, or the amount of money to give to the church, or the downsides of war, comes from all of history, all the experiences your grandfather and the people in your town tell you about. So I think that's interesting. So I guess one question would be, you've kind of explained how this happened, how a group of people that are extraordinarily fringe in day-to-day life, one of you guys might correct this, but I think it's 0.5% of Americans are communists, became really almost dominant in the academy. I mean, 26%, I think, of social science professors identify as Marxists. But the follow-up question would be, what effect does this have when you teach students or when you debate your books? Do people actually believe all this bullshit some former hippie professor is telling them, or do people just kind of put up with it and process through B school or whatever and then go on with their lives? What do you guys think?
Well,
Very personal.
I mean, I think so many students are pressured to go to college, or at least when I was teaching, that they just wanted to get through it. They wanted to know, you've probably heard this as well, you assign them a paper and they ask, well, what do you want? Tell me exactly what you want, right? They want to follow a formula. They want to get through it. Um, so I think the majority are very cynical, and get through it. And then of course you get those who are kind of floundering maybe in their personal lives, or are really grounded in what they believe. They'll go along with it because they want to be accepted by their peers. And then you have them out on the streets, fighting with ICE and, and back,
Extra credit.
2011.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. I mean, I actually went to conferences of composition professors, and that's what they were encouraging their colleagues to use as assignments. Take your students out to a protest, have them analyze the signs, write papers, or not actual formal papers, but response papers. What are your feelings about this? Okay, and then it's just all scribbled down. Okay, A or check, and then they go on and do what they want to do.
Yeah, I mean, you imagine it has to have some effect if the majority of what's taught in college is what I think of as anti-knowledge. I mean, so every now and then I'll poll on social media about something absolutely ridiculous. I mean, one of the ones that created the biggest brouhaha was, is your partner having any financial or sexual expectations of you whatsoever abuse? And about 90% of people said, no, of course not. But about 10% of people were very passionate. Like, if I don't want to work and I want to stay home and play video games all day, by God, I can do that. So, I mean, I think there is that baseline laid down where people pick up this stuff and some of them feel something gelling when they hear it. But Brooks, I mean, you were a student until actually surprisingly recently. I mean, you went through military, civil education. I mean, you had a communist professor at, I believe, Memphis, very famous one.
Yeah.
How did you react to this stuff, and how did you see other people reacting to it?
Well, so, I went to school a little later than most. I'd gone earlier than the military, and then I did the military, kind of broke up my academic career. When I went back, I started at University of Memphis as a political science major, and they are left of Marx. And I used to say that as a joke, but then I looked at it, and technically speaking, they were left of Marx, given the fact that Angela Davis of the Communist Party left the Communist Party because they were too conservative. So technically, you had a lot of former Black Panthers and Communist Party members in the faculty and in the department. And, I hate to say this, but for me in the class, you'd have a bunch of 18-year-olds just shoveling in their mouth. But like, I went to college because I wanted my ideas challenged and I wanted to fight in the battlefield of ideas, and so I was this guy constantly. Wait a second. And so, we would our fights would then be the instruction for the rest of the class in most of those courses. I in hindsight, I wonder if I was making trouble, but really I just didn't want a one-sided, monologue to go in and out of the kids' ears. But, there used to be an attitude that, yeah, let them hear all this stuff, but then, they're going to get in the real world, and the real world punishes bad ideas very quickly. Reality for the common man, so to speak, in opposition to the ivory tower that you described before, and their, disdain for the common person. But at some point that reached a scale, and I don't know when it happened. I think it was probably in the 2010 to 2014 timeframe, but, there was enough mass that it trickled into the HR departments in corporate, and then just it was a full transmission of the virus into corporate America. So, the attitude of let them get into the real world and they'll get that out of their system only worked for a period of time. So, that was my experience in class. I want to ask you about Zinn, because I got to say, I got so many friends that are, were raised by PBS and Sesame Street, and, they herald Zinn and Zinn's American history.
Is Howard Zinn mentioned in Sesame Street?
No, but
I mean, I wouldn't be surprised. I would be a little horrified.
Well, I mean, when I look back at my viewing of the Children's Television Workshop and a lot of PBS, content, it was very much aligned with Zinn's view of history. So
why is there a man living in a trash can? Sorry, Les.
It's the system, man. It's keeping him down. He's green,
Misogyny.
right? But So I really relish the chance to get at Zinn, because I think his influence has been just terrible for the country. In your research in debunking Howard Zinn, you know, was there anything that he had said or done in his content that just, what was the most egregious, untruth, the most egregious lie that was beyond the pale that you can think of in your research of him?
Well, the fundamental error is that he does not believe that the United States has a right to exist, that it is an illegitimate country, first of all, because it was quote unquote discovered by Christopher Columbus, who was only seeking gold and was enslaving and beating um, and killing the natives for his greed. Um, and that, there was peace and harmony here among all the tribes.
It was a communist matriarchal lesbian utopia, wasn't it?
It was exactly. It was just like those hippie communes, and where everyone got along and shared, and then Christopher Columbus comes along, and after that, it is just uh, travesty after travesty, oppression. It's just never ending oppression to the point where we are today, or until the point when he died in 2010, where, it's the most greedy, unjust, country in the world, if you read a people's histories seriously. So, the idea that it was illegitimate. He also had lies about the Viet Cong, and he misrepresented a, a book that was written by someone who worked with the Vietnamese natives and had great sympathy for them, was friends with them, knew what the Viet Cong did to those people, which included torture and murder. But yet Zinn presented them as being, kind of benevolent community organizers. They were, organizing these little villages so they could rule themselves democratically. Um, so, just the twisting around of what someone else has written is to me egregious. You can make up the stuff you want, or you can come up with your own theories. But if someone, takes something that you've written, and they, say this is what he said, but they're presenting the opposite, that would make you pretty angry. And then when you go on the internet, I'm trying to remember this author's name. Um, what you find is Zinn's interpretation at the top of the search results. So he has, manipulated, misrepresented this country and what other people have written and said. And he does that over and over again to come up with this narrative that presents this, terrible picture of this country, of which, of course, he, enjoyed privileges as a pampered professor with tenure. So, but that's typical, communist behavior.
Yeah, the issue's never the issue, only the revolution.
Yeah, I also think that side point Mary just made is funny if you've ever lived in a big city. I mean, like the Birkenstock Bolshevik is a real thing. So, I mean, Howard Zinn must be at least deci-millionaire by this point. And I mean, the classic example, of course, is Bernie Sanders, who used to open every stump speech raving against the millionaires and the billionaires. And then he wrote 4 bestsellers himself, and now it's just the billionaires, following his bank account getting boosted a little bit. One question specifically, you brought this up when you talked about the intro to Zinn's book. And you just outlined a little bit about the misuse of other sources. What did Zinn get wrong about Christopher Columbus? Because that's the opening chapter I think most people really remember from high school, that everyone was dancing and making love in paradise, and then the metal-clad whites arrived and started butchering people. How much of that is true?
Um, uh, Almost nothing. You know, what he did is I point out, and I discovered, this reading one of his sources, Hans Koenig, who was not a historian. He was a playwright and a screenwriter and a novelist. So Zinn plagiarized from him. He took big chunks of what he wrote and rearranged a few words, did something that I would have failed a freshman for doing, and if the freshman had done it more than once, he may have been expelled from even the community college. But this is what Zinn did, and so none of that was true. Columbus, wanted to convert the natives. He was a devout Catholic. He did it, not because he wanted to oppress them, but he wanted to save their souls. His intentions were good. And he actually, I think it was his third journey, he was punished for, rebuking the men that he had left behind, had two of them hanged for abusing the natives, and that's when he was sent back in chains to Spain. So he suffered because of his advocacy of the natives. To the contrary of what Zinn says, that he was, chopping off hands of those who could not produce the gold he wanted. He never did such a thing. He never owned a slave. He didn't beat them. He did none of the things that Zinn attributes to him.
Fair enough. Brooks Crenshaw, actually, you're a former military man, and I have a question that relates to some of the stuff that was just said. Columbus, actually, from most of the real history I've read as well, was a decent man, certainly for his time. But how do you overall think we should judge people from these past eras? This seems to be another point. And people say, well, Cortez and Moctezuma, by our standards, were both bloodthirsty butchers. I mean, are our standards, which date back to maybe 1951, the Geneva Conventions, is that what we should be using? Or are these just a bunch of made up modern rules? And you have to come up with something, a more traditional honor code, biblical morality, something else to judge people by.
Yeah, our standards are a matter of the trajectory that preceded us. I mean, our standards were made possible by our predecessors, and so there's a commensurate level of gratitude that is owed in that regard. So, like when I look at historical figures, I want to know what was prevalent at the time. Who were the best figures relative to their time? I mean, that's because any comparison to modern sensitivities and sensibilities are, I mean, a fixed game, right? And I think that's the point with the neo-Marxists. Like they're essentially fixing the game with regard to, slave owning, etc. In a time when slavery was ubiquitous. It was the default. And meanwhile, we're typing about it on our iPhones that, have cobalt that were mined exclusively by slaves. So like I think it would be a really good exercise to set up, an audience for is guilt of profiting off of slavery, a social sin, and does it essentially negate a historical figure from consideration? And get that poll out and see what they say, and then tell them about the cobalt and the Congo, because like that's today. And
that's actually a really interesting point. That, I mean, not only are our standards inadequate to judge the past, but also today we sort of take for granted a bunch of things that people in the future might find evil. I mean, not to be too cliche with this, but factory farming is probably clear example. I enjoy animals. Many people in my family hunt in the traditional way. I mean, for just this is less serious, but I read today that 16% of young women in Britain are on OnlyFans, the online prostitution platform. And I mean, I imagine that people at any previous point in history, male or female, would have had some strong issues with that. So, I mean, when people say, well, I would have been an abolitionist in the past, the question, I mean, Brooks, you laid this out really well, would be, well, do you not use iPhones today?
Right.
What are your feelings about a third of the internet being pornography? I mean, do you hunt all your own meat? And I'm pretty sure most people would fail. And most of these rules are just made up, but most people would not reach moral perfection today any more than in the past. Mary, I mean, you've written extensively and well about this. And what's your take? How do you judge a Christopher Columbus as being good or bad? Do you use the norms of his class and time, or?
Well, I don't think a historian should judge. He should understand, you know, right? And yeah, look, you need to take the perspective of his time and his place. And there is she's actually an anthropologist. Her name is escaping me now. She's written books about Columbus, and she studied him from an anthropological perspective. She had gone and done field work, I think, in Turkey. And so when you do that kind of scholarship, you have to put yourself in their frame of reference and their frame of mind. And that's what a good scholar does, or a good fiction writer does. And of course, you know, the old biblical saying about, you know, seeing, you know, you know, splinter in someone else's eye, you know, when you have, you know, a whole 2x4 or something. So, you know, we've kind of lost sight of that. And, you know, scholarship is supposed to open up the world and give you a better understanding of what happened in the past, and also to instill a sense of gratitude, right? I mean, we've got thousands and thousands of years of civilization from which we benefit. And so there should be gratitude for that, you know, for our form of government and our economic system, all that, you know, we stand on the shoulders of giants. But the opposite is being instilled in students. They're told to tear down and to present themselves as being smarter. And you think about that, you know, some 13-year-old kid is, you know, smarter than Thomas Jefferson, or right. But that's what they're made to think. But it's false, and it's a detriment to them and to our society.
Do you see that as an attempt to start at year zero here, you know, to kill the four olds, so to speak?
Do I? Yeah, I mean, it's, you know, I think, you know, especially K through 12 teachers, for, you know, because I've interacted with them and I've written about, you know, K through 12 education. I've gone to some of these teachers' conferences. They're about control. I mean, there's a lot of them, there's something really sick about the way they see their students. They want to mold them, and they want to control the way they think. They want to make them, you know, in their own image. So it's a big power trip for a lot of people to teach, I think. I mean, it's not very complimentary, but I think I've seen it.
Well, this is something actually, and I was going to ask Brooks's question almost verbatim, by the way. Like, is there a reason these revolutions always begin in the year zero, where you throw out everything before? Like, only the anointed now have knowledge. And the problem is then you have to rediscover marriage and parliamentary democracy and so on. And we're coming back from one of these social revolutions right now. I mean, I do a decent number of men's events, and right now the fatherless birth rate not to drag this in, but is 71% for Black Americans. It just hit 40% for white Americans with Caucasian Hispanics mixed in. So from via everything from radical feminism to rethinking Christianity, we sort of tossed out this old idea of kind of pair bonding, which goes back before fire. And now we have to find it again, which is very problematic. But oh, and second, just sort of comment from my notes here. The comment about teaching, a police buddy of mine once said, there's a certain kind of person that wants to be a teacher, a cop, or a coach, and you have to watch out for it. You can't let those boys get on. But there are only so many things in life where you can point at 50 young men and say, drop and give me 50. Or, everyone write these 20 sentences. And so you have to screen for kind of the power junkie. And I would suspect that in early education, these might often be very pleasant, upper middle class women that don't look quite like power junkies. And that's how some of them sneak by the usual tools we use. But just going down the kind of the list of these here, one question that was suggested, I think, by our missing panel member, Christy Kelly, was, and Brooks, I might ask this to you first, and then flip to the other author. But something that keeps coming up is, why do people believe some of the stuff that they're told during cultural revolutionary periods? I mean, so for example, when I wrote my book, Lies My Liberal Teacher Told Me, the point that seemed the craziest to me that the U.S. government and the educational institutions kept going on about was the Native Americans being peaceful. So, I mean, this comes up with the Columbus thing. I mean, these armored warriors arrived in a land where, there was no word for war, all this sort of stuff. They introduced slavery. If you know anything about the Taino or the Caribs, who were actually legendary fighting men themselves, that's just nonsense. Brooks, why do people believe this? If someone says whites invented slavery, why would someone be willing to accept that all the great Black and Asian and Arab states throughout history never had slaves, never thought of making a captive break rocks? What does that?
I mean, I think in general, you can't know everything. And so, especially outside of academia, you take your cues from, multiple iterations. You hear the same thing multiple times, and, most people don't dig too terribly deep. The other reason, and this ties into a story, my first exposure to the Milgram experiments and Solomon Asch in school, the first time I was exposed to those experiments and their outcomes, I thought naively, oh, wow, we're really susceptible to hacking. I sure am glad we did this research to understand it so we can see our blind spot and potentially fix it. No, that tool has been used by marketing firms and media and universities and political parties at all. And, I think there is a momentum or a scale at which a message has to be adopted or else, in the sense that it's line B when clearly line A is the one that is equal to the line in question. So I think social pressure is, I think for a lot of people, and I would say that those that were malleable in the Solomon Asch sense, conformity is probably more valuable than knowing.
That's a great line. Conformity for the average, just sort of citizen, is often more valuable than knowing. You can at some level know things, but you also know that you'll be jailed or whipped or whatever if you say them in public. And the communist bloc is a great example of this. But Mary, do you agree with that? Why do people believe openly crazy things that they're told in school? Like, I mean, flipping back to some of the points about feminism and pop culture, like marriage is an institution designed to be a male fantasy that oppresses women. Always struck me as a bizarre claim. But only whites were violent historically. Why do people believe these things? Men can be women. And do people believe these things, or are they just conforming?
Well, I mean, that's why it starts with the educational system. I mean, think back, I think back to when I was 13, or you think back to when you're 13, you want to be accepted, right? I mean, I think most teenagers feel that way. They want to have friends, and they don't have the background to sort of think out uh, outside of what this authority figure in the classroom is saying. It's going to be on the test, so you believe them. This is an authority figure. And so that's why they start young. And so you're seeing the indoctrination that, was once only at the college level it's now down to the preschool level. The 1619 project was made into lessons before it was published and distributed to thousands of students, and they start in kindergarten. And you have and that's why they're aiming for it, because they know if someone who grew up in a different time period, and if you told them, gave them a sex education class and said, men can be women and women can be men, be laughed at, out of the room. But this is gradual. I mean, it goes over generations. So now to not believe that means you're the radical, you're the extremist, because it's become accepted over time.
Yeah. And again, some excellent lines there. I mean, people believe this is true because it'll be on the test. I mean, that does
Right.
stick in the mind. I mean, that's the determinant to some extent of what the truth is, right? What does it say in Wikipedia? What does it say in Britannica? And also, both of you have mentioned that there's this idea of kind of starting with the kids. And I don't mean to insult the great human religions, but that's what they do, right? Like, if you want someone to believe that an angel came down to North America and showed a merchant named Joseph Smith an updated version of the Bible, you probably wouldn't start by sitting the three of us down and saying, well, forget science and all that Catholicism talk. This is the way. You would start with very young people. So,
And you'd make
really,
a bunch of them too.
oh, sorry, I didn't catch that.
And you would make a bunch of young people too as a consequence.
Oh, yeah, that's another thing. Yeah, you'd have as many kids as possible. I actually think woke people have figured out kind of a cuckoo bird way around that, which is that they have almost no kids, but they pitch their philosophy to everyone else's kids. Like, these are the people in the media, these are the people in the schools.
There are children.
Yeah, and that's a big part of this, right? I don't know if either of you guys has ever read like Hillary Clinton's old writings, but I mean, you can go up through it. It takes a village. Like, children really belong to the state, not their parents. Their parents are impediments to the state. That's a quote. So I mean, that's the ideal. Everyone is raised in some kind of a kibbutz, and you learn the true way, which is basically woke race communism. But all right, I obviously pulled up your list of writings before this interview, and this looks to be one of the last couple questions. We move past 10, but so you've moved on with the debunking. You debunked 1619, you debunked Howard Zinn, and now you are debunking someone who may be the greatest sort of center-left icon, which is FDR. What could you ever say about this magnificent fellow? What could he have done wrong?
Oh, well, he basically extended the Great Depression, instituted these programs that benefit the wealthy under the pretense that they would benefit the poor. They do not. We're stuck with them, and that's the purpose behind Doge, is to get rid of what Franklin Roosevelt had established. Just because he wanted the government power. I think was a poor war leader. I think World War II could have been ended sooner, but a very flawed and manipulative man, very self-centered and selfish, egotistical, and not the sort of happy warrior, benevolent advocate for the working man. Far from it. He was an elitist. He was not a traitor to his class. He loved government compulsion, and he sold it under the sort of the title of cooperation and interdependence and collaboration, but really championed the idea of big government and compelling average Americans to do the bidding of government. He didn't know any real middle class people or working class people, and actually had contempt for them. So those are the nice things I have to say about FDR.
And I mean, these podcasts are starting to get a pretty good sized audience again. I'd certainly encourage people to go out and buy that book, Debunking FDR. At this point, all three are available, right?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yes, yes, they are.
Yeah, I've glanced through at least two of them actually in some depth. I'd recommend people buy Brooks Crenshaw. Actually, moving. Do you have similar heretical things to say about the New Deal and the Great Society? Like, I think a lot of people see these as a second constitution, right? The welfare system of the
Right.
United States. The Civil Rights Act, I think, would really be the second constitution. We can't fight each other anymore. Racial discrimination is illegal. Sex discrimination at your men's club is illegal. Like these are seen as the pillars of society. How do you feel about them?
Yeah, I definitely concur with Mary at a much more surface level observation. From one of the things that always surprises people that I will point out to them is the reason that we get our health care through our employer is because FDR put in salary caps, and you couldn't pay more than the $100,000 annually, and so companies, to compete for the best talent, would offer to pay healthcare. And so when we complain about the healthcare system and how terrible it is and how capitalism has failed in that sense, it's always helpful to remind them of the missteps in history that got us here. And FDR was certainly one of the biggest camel's noses under the tent, so to speak. When you talked about the Bill of Rights and then civil rights and almost a reconstitution, that was an era in which the notions of other rights, right? The next Bill of Rights, the freedom from want, and those types of platitudes that are not enforceable and rather utopian. Whereas the original Bill of Rights is fairly concrete and fairly enforceable. And that was one of the beginning, one of the first siren songs away from the Bill of Rights. Woodrow Wilson is certainly another one. But I would ask, Mary, who else are you thinking about debunking in the future?
Well, I would like to debunk the 1960s. There's a lot in the 1960s that went awry, I think. We're living with the consequences. Um, and oh, there are a host of various individuals, but right now what comes to mind is the 1960s. Someone suggested John F. Kennedy, who is really an icon and is sometimes seen as being a conservative, and he was not. Um, so I'm trying to get. I guess I'm a brand now. I'm a debunker, but I've been working on a long project since 2011 on George Schuyler, who was a conservative Black journalist before Thomas Sowell's time. And Thomas Sowell has written about him. George Schuyler lived from 1895 to 1977, was a real trailblazer, very unique, very brave, funny, original. And so that biography has been in the works for many years.
That sounds genuinely interesting. Although there's nothing wrong with having a brand that makes the publisher keep calling you. I mean, there are
Yeah.
an endless number of public figures who are not as pristine as their image. I mean, we talk about the 60s. I mean, if you have even the sort of laissez-faire, quote unquote, gentleman's morality that I do, I mean, if you actually look at Kennedy or Martin Luther King or most of these guys, I mean, there's a lot to be said there. But I guess actually this may be the last question, Mary. I mean, you mentioned earlier on something that I thought was really interesting. I noted it in passing, but you said having a lot of these silly books around, whether it's, Howard Zinn as a young student or, one of the Gloria Anzaldúa, one of the, woke wise manifestos as an adult is a status symbol. What would we have to change in society to make your book debunking 1619, and here's the actual history, or something like that. A high quality volume on the right, the status symbol instead. How does that happen?
Well, there is a conspiracy, I think. There's a conspiracy between publishers, librarians. I know of a librarian in the state of Georgia who has a copy of my debunking the 1619 project, will not give it to the person, is afraid to give it to the person who catalogs it for fear of losing her job. The journals will not review your books, they'll ignore it. And so they hope that you'll just quietly fade away. But I think, one of the things we have to do, it has to be political, and we need the support. We need, the high prestige presses to be publishing our works, not complaining about my publisher, but if we want to do something more scholarly, we should be able to do it. And the left has had such a stranglehold on these publicly funded institutions, whether directly or indirectly, and we need to take that back. And I think that might do it. And I'm already seen as an extremist, so.
I mean, you seem like a perfectly pleasant academic, and that's one of the things that's really funny about a lot of the taboo people that we've had on this show, like Elizabeth Weiss, the anthropologist. I mean, her argument is just that museums shouldn't have to throw away their collections of bones and weapons. And I mean, that even for a conservative program, I mean, that episode was followed by dozens of angry emails. Those are the great, 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 great grandfathers of my. So, I mean, there is a standard there. And I don't think a lot of people outside of the business, quote unquote, recognize how pervasive it is. All right. Last question for me, although Brooks might have one. Mary, what is your favorite book? What's the one volume people should read to really, as much as they can, understand your field or life more broadly? Nonfiction book.
A nonfiction book. Oh my goodness.
You can really say whatever. I'm not doing anything.
Well, I mean, there's Bernard Balin is a great historian. Robert Caro, who's written the multi-volume biography of Lyndon Johnson. If you want to understand him, very detailed. Just and there are just so many. I have stacks and stacks of books. When it comes to nonfiction, I'll just, even if I don't agree with the perspective, I'll read it for the information. And as I'm reading, I'm arguing with it, checking footnotes, checking things out. So that is a tough question. So I'll have to look at my bookshelf and get back to you on that with a list. How's that?
That sounds good. We'll follow up by email. I'm teasing, but in fact, if you did give a list of mandatory reading for young people or something, I would put it on social media and we could see people debate it. I'd have similar issues, although, I mean, if I had to pick one book, it would probably be something by early Thomas Sowell, Conquests and Cultures or something like that.
Yeah.
Actually, it would probably be The Vision of the Anointed, which is an excellent, just sort of reader-friendly breakdown of kind of conservative and center-right thought. Brooks, what's your favorite book? Do you have one?
Oh, wow.
Do you even have one?
Well, so like it's an unfair question. I don't do favorites very well because it depends on the day and the mood and the subject matter. The biblical narrative is certainly the one that I spent a lot of time at. I think Hayek's Road to Serfdom is one of my favorites. Hazlitt's Economics in One Lesson is a great primer for how to think about the science of decision making, so to speak. So I think those are two really good primers for anybody that hasn't read them.
Yeah, The Road to Serfdom obviously is one of the all-time classics, which I'm seeing assigned much less often than it used to be in college. Fair enough. Now, as we move toward the conclusion of our program, we usually each end with one sort of thought or piece of wisdom. Mine today would simply be check out Mary's book. For that matter, you can check out my own and Brooks's writings, and go in greater depth with some of the volumes that we've just mentioned, from analyses of past presidents to the book list of Thomas Sowell. If you're a typical student that's watching this podcast out of curiosity, and sort of junior executive seems to be a lot of our audience, I think there's a lot of knowledge that you might or might not agree with, but that you just haven't heard. So go check out some of it. There's far more scholarship talking about how Native culture actually was, or what the era of slavery was actually like, than you'll find contained within the pages of, say, 1619. Crenshaw, what's your final thought of wisdom?
Well, so the nature of this topic, and I'm speaking to two authors that have both written on Zen and history. The nature of the fight, and I would say the motive behind it, is reminiscent of the Orwell quote, who controls the past controls the present, who controls the present controls the future. And that's the rub. That's why you want to control the historical narrative, so that you can control generations to come. But I'm somewhat optimistic. I'll give you an anecdote. I love Alton Brown. He's a wonderful chef, and I've really enjoyed his programming, because he really puts a certain amount of chemistry into making good food. And he recently posted on social media, that how influential and what an amazing work Howard Zinn's The People's History of the United States was, or of America was. And like, he had to take it down because the comments section just nuked him. And I don't think he even, I've never considered him as somewhat political. I've never heard him speak politically, but I think that surprised him. And I think that was a good response. So when I see that play out in a mainstream, this was Facebook, this wasn't Elon's X. So the fact that he kind of, mea culpa and retreated after enough people challenged his position, that gives me some optimism. So that would be my closing take on the discussion.
Good point. I mean, I think to some extent, all it took was one free speech platform. I mean, you've seen Zuck liberalize a little when it comes to threads too, but I mean, it was really Elon Musk buying X. There's a lot of nonsensical racism on there now, but you can also say pretty much anything. And so once a mass of people started saying, to pick the obvious example, men aren't women, it became really, really hard to deny that. I mean, we just saw Simone Biles apologize to Reilly Gaines for pointing out that the star player on the Minnesota Class 4A state championship team was a boy. And Biles came in and said, how dare you? You're attacking kids. And Reilly Gaines just, outlined the guy's face and was like, no, this pitcher is a man. We're done with this. And I think a mass majority of people supported Gaines. But all right, Mary Grabar, what is your word of wisdom for the audience, for the listening world? What do you think?
Read, and especially to the young people, get off of TikTok, and don't get all your information from social media. But I used to ask my students, do you remember getting lost in a book? And it was so sad, because they looked at me like, I was crazy. What are you talking about, getting lost in a book, right? But I think we need that. We need to be able to focus and concentrate, and also to have longer conversations like this one. So I think these two activities are complementary. The conversation, in person, or, we're doing the best we can here, and, and going and reading and studying in depth. And I think that will, make people not only smarter, but more serene and grounded. And so I'm a big advocate of reading. We lose a lot when we stop reading. You can't get information in it any other way that has the same kind of impact as you do with reading. So that's from a former English professor.
All right, that's a great closing comment from an excellent scholar. Read books and talk to people. And again, there's a lot of advice that's always been true that we're now having to rediscover. All right, I am, as always, Will Reilly. you have been introduced to our guest, Mary Grabar, the author of the Debunking series, now really debunking FDR, debunking 1619, debunking Howard Zinn, and I am today, as always, with Brooks Crenshaw. So thanks for watching. Have a great day.
I got a country to say. Patriot J, I'm saving the day. Patriot J, I'm saving the day from you commies who lame. No, you can't fuck with me. I got a country to say. God bless the US of A. Land of the free and the home of the brave. God get all of the praise. I got a country to say, cause I'm Patriot J and I'm saving the day.